Here we are. All right, so everybody, you could see that Ryan Christian is here. My producer, who is 10 months old, took over for him last time because we had a little bit of a schedule mishap. But all's well that ends well. So, Ryan, the last time that you were on the channel was what? 2 weeks ago or so, and a lot's changed, or not a lot, I guess. It's sort of the same battle, but your backup channel was deleted from YouTube for allegedly multiple community guideline strikes, but you never even got notification that you had a strike. It was just gone with the email, right?
I I got one in the very beginning, and that it was as usual, just kind of this broad, as anybody that's done this knows, just this broad idea that you violated some, nebulous community guideline, and then the idea is that you just have to change the thing you don't even know where you committed it. And sometimes they give you the breakdown of how, but the ones I get are just this boilerplate nonsense. And yes, then no more after that, and then just kind of this knee jerk reaction after. It was actually after an interview with Vanessa Beeley, but what they continue to cite elsewhere seems to be medical misinformation. So I don't know what caused it, but yeah, and they just pulled the plug on another backup channel. And this will be two channels from YouTube that have been pulled.
It's got to mean you're doing something right. At least I'm going to go with that.
Well, just to point out, the video that I was doing, it seemed very correlated. It happened like instantly after this was done. It was an interview with Vanessa Beeley, one of the last surviving investigative journalists out there, and she had an interview personally with the Yemeni ambassador. We were discussing what she was told by the Yemeni ambassador. And this is a story that it was really nowhere at the time. And this is about the fact that the CIA was caught on audio asking for the Yemeni government to release an Al Qaeda leader personally for him. And it was a big story. And she was the first one to cover this story. And it just shows you that this is the kind of real journalism. And from Vanessa's point, I'm talking, that is being just deleted from YouTube and elsewhere. And it's just so incredible to me that that can be called fake news.
My guess, having heard what you're talking about, is that at least this is just, again, opinion, but I don't know for sure. I'm thinking it's all the other stuff leading up to it, and they just picked this one. However, I will say that they picked this one to sort of, this was the timing was maybe coincidental, but who knows? My friend Eric had his channel removed for a very similar reason, though it ended up, they said it was hijacked, which I don't believe that that's what happened. I don't know what YouTube's deal is, but I think they like to blame things that, so like, oh no, we didn't do it. It wasn't us. But it was just a Bitcoin deal. Now, he did have a giveaway, so maybe they were thinking, okay, this guy's spamming people. That's what they said. That was the next reason was for spam or whatever. But I guess the point of it all is that it's one of those things where here you are, you're trying to do journalism that, I really liked what you said the last time, which is what's wrong with making mistakes. So even worst case scenario, okay, you're sitting there, you're just taking some brave stabs, right, into worlds that a lot of people are not willing to even walk into, much less really go after like you are. And worst case scenario, you know what? Every once in a while, like you figure out, okay, maybe this wasn't it, and you correct your reporting, and it's way better than a lot of, if not most, of what's happening in mainstream news. So to see somebody like you go away, I think has really been upsetting for especially the people who follow you. But for people like me who really believe in what you add to the journalism world, especially knowing what I know about the corporate atmosphere that I came from. So what is your thought? I mean, I know that I've said I think the timing may be coincidental, but do you think it really had to do with discussing Yemen? And maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that interview too, since it got cut off.
Yeah, no, I mean, technically, no, the interview didn't actually get cut off, but it was just instantly. It was right after
Okay.
we were done, and it was just the whole thing was down, so people couldn't even share it. But I don't know. I can't say for sure. I do know that the discussion about Yemen and foreign policy, before the whole COVID thing was what we were being censored for. So clearly there's a sensitive nature there. But regardless, back to your point, it's really important to think about what we're talking about in that regard, about making mistakes. And look, the big difference is if you look at what the mainstream does as a general concept. Now that of course doesn't mean that every single person in these, so you're a good example, someone like, Ben Swan, who was previously there. These are people that were, I would argue, doing the kind of thing that we're doing in this objective standpoint. Is what today it's very, we've got one anonymous source. We've got intelligence sources say. No, I mean, just completely ignoring all these journalistic and, foundational ideas from before this. and stating these things as absolute fact. And yet we're coming around from a different perspective. And yes, we're just saying something that counters what they're saying, but we're not saying alternatively, this is the fact. We're saying here's alternative information, right? Look at it for yourself. I'll give you my opinion, but at the end of the day, it's about you deciding for yourself. And how is that side of it fake news and the other side of it, and and both sides are shown to be wrong from time to time. One side is giving you an objective, overlook and giving you all sides, including what the mainstream is saying. One side is giving you a very cultivated, aggressively pushed one side narrative, and there's no alternative. And it's just incredible. Anybody honest with themselves can recognize that there's more going on here than just protecting the truth, right? There's agendas involved here. And anybody that's, giving you options and saying think for yourself is probably not the one you should worry about, in my opinion.
Curious what you think about the government and these companies, because at first I thought, and maybe sometimes still do, that they're getting pressured from the government and they don't really want to censor, but they're doing it because they're just trying to keep their businesses going and are facing increasing pressure. We've seen these hearings that continue to happen. And now I'm starting to wonder if that's theater and actually the government and these companies are far more, what's the right word? There's far more collusion, I guess, than maybe the average person is aware of. Especially now that we know there's somebody who sits on Biden, is his cabinet. I don't even know if it's a cabinet position, or at least it's like his team, right? Doesn't he have some kind of like Silicon Valley czar, position on his team? And I just kind of wonder if the hearings are almost not necessarily that everybody that's a part of them is there sinisterly, like the Wizard of Oz or something behind the curtain and we're not allowed to see, and they know it, but we don't. But maybe people higher up, there's just more going on there where it's not just like, oh, poor tech companies that are getting bullied by government and they just have to do this and change their policies to keep their doors open. That there's more partnership and control there than maybe we're aware of. I'm just wondering now more about that. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, truthfully, I wouldn't say your curtain analogy is too far off, but people just can't really wrap their mind around how broad this is, how far-reaching, and how long this kind of thing has been going on, long before the Silicon Valley was even there, right? The point is that these powerful entities, and you could even say this kind of control has been around long before the United States was around, right? I mean, these powerful entities will always do what they can to control as much as they can if that's what they're trying to accomplish. If we're looking at something like this today, it's not a secret to look at things like the Atlantic Council working with Facebook to fact check information. I mean, that's an obvious government overlap, which, by the way, is one of the clear tenets of fascism, when you kind of blur the line between public and private, which, talking about these public-private partnerships, that's another discussion today. But I clearly think that there is an obvious overlap there. And I do agree that by and large, in my opinion, that a lot of these, I mean, just look at whatever comes from what happens with these congressional hearings. Not much other than just what the government wants. So I do agree that it ultimately seems to be more theater than anything else. That's my opinion. But I do agree that there's a lot of evidence that would suggest that the government is, by and large, at the very least, aggressively driving the direction of these companies. And if that's the case, well, then as Caitlin Johnstone always points out, then this is literally government censorship, right? I mean, which is the point, right? If they're being told to censor things based on government or narratives or directives from the government, then we have a right to stand up. But censorship should be resisted against from powerful entities in any regard. But in this case, we can clearly see that the government is involved with choosing these things, and we have a right to push back against that. Constitutional rights still matter in this country. At least we're told that.
Right. Yeah, we're told that. I'm showing everybody your tweet. The cowards at YouTube deleted the Tlav backup channel. What it must be like to be so terrified of objective discussion while screaming about free speech and facts. Today's video was on Vanessa Beeley's meeting with the Yemeni ambassador, but fake news, though, right, Team YouTube? And so this is what they sent you. Hi, the last American vagabond backup. We have reviewed your content and found severe repeated violations of our community guidelines. Because of this, we have removed your channel from YouTube. We know this is probably very upsetting news, but it's our job to make sure that YouTube is a safe place for all. And, then they go on to just say, like, hey, you can appeal if you want to.
Which, by the way, is never really a process, and I show people that all the time. You click it, and it gives you a 300 character box. That's right. It, mind you, to argue that you didn't violate what you have no idea you actually violated. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, to your point, right? Okay, so you don't know what you violated. First off, so how are you going to argue? Secondly, say it was something about COVID and you're like, hey, I've got the government documents, I've got the facts. How are you supposed to put that in 300 characters, right? So
Right.
yeah, you're right. It almost is made for the 30-second soundbite corporate news talking point kind of news, not the stuff that you're trying to do, even when you're trying to appeal, because even the depth of information you're allowed to give for your appeal process to get your channel back on is not anywhere near what you would need, and it just goes to show that if YouTube, I really believe that if they really wanted to know, granted, I'm sure I'm not going to say I'm sure, but there were staffing issues where I used to work, so I'm just going to give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe they don't have a million people out there that are able to comb through everything that you're saying. What do you think is, say they just let somebody like you or me say what we want to say, okay? And then don't come after, like they're like, what would a world look like, I guess? And are there concerns on your part that if you didn't have somebody that, or an algorithm that just says like, okay, you've talked about this too many times, we're shutting you off. If you didn't have this, what would YouTube or what would the internet look like, best case scenario, if you didn't have this?
Well, it would be real actual free speech, right? I mean, the point is here at the end of the day that, we can just take this to the obvious extreme, which is where this always ends up when this discussion is had, is that, well, what about people that are screaming about, I mean, just you take the just like Nazis or, whatever the big button issue is that we're not supposed to be pointing out, or, suggesting that certain major events didn't happen, not to hurt your channel here, that kind of a thing. These are things that they argue are dangerous, right? Or that hate speech will lead to violence. And so this is the kind of idea, we just can't allow that. But the reality is, as we all know, and we all knew before this weird political push started happening, is the answer to bad speech is more speech. And of course, you do not believe in free speech if you believe on any limitations to it. The reality is that you have a platform like this, you can lay out your guidelines and say, if you do this, if you attack people, if you say, if you do things that are currently crimes, then we'll have the right to remove you. And nobody should have an issue with that, because they're clear. And these are things that, violence, threats, things like this. But the moment it gets into some kind of a subjective concept, well, you insult somebody, call someone a name, these are things that we as a community need to just acknowledge as their right to express themselves. And the point is, we can all collectively be like, yeah, and he's a really gross, disgusting person, right? And then the point is that, especially even on media, if you continually push these things off to the side, what you do is you create something like they're alternatively pointing to as like Parler. And I'm not saying that's what Parler is, but that's the perception they're trying to create, or BitChute. They push these people into the corners, and so it creates these other areas where they act like are just disdainful and then later go after them. What we need is just a completely free speech element. And what you're talking about, like on YouTube or the platform that I'm currently working on, where you have only things that you can violate, such as laws and so on, and then people have the right to say what they want. Now, I don't see the real problem in that, other than assuming that that will lead to something that would then be a crime, I guess. But the point is, once a crime is committed, we already have laws to stop these things. So I just don't see the idea. I mean, you could theoretically push this back even further and keep going, well, here are the thoughts that lead to those thoughts that lead to danger. So then we're going to start removing the thoughts that lead to those thoughts. I mean, it's the same logical conclusion, right? So you can't just keep doing that, but that's where it's going to keep going. Sorry, that kind of went all over the place.
The reason I even asked that question, which seems like a dumb question, because I think a lot of people were like, because it would be awesome if we had YouTube as an open platform and whatnot, is really because maybe I'll save the soundbite and I'm going to juxtapose it with some of the government officials that I hear when you ask the same question. What would it look like if you didn't have a babysitter? And you hear the total opposite, which is it would be super dangerous. We would have wars and genocides, and which we already have. Exactly, which they get to do, right? And all these crazy things. Because it's just, I really don't even know if those two perspectives can even communicate. It's almost like they're on two different levels of reality. Not to sound like a snob about it, but I found that even trying to debate this topic with people who are of that mindset, of the like very scarcity, fear, danger mentality, there's very little room there for what you're talking about. And for whatever reason, just throw out the window how all these authority figures have failed in the past, government, right, being one of the big ones, and yet we still want them to control our speech in this particular case. It doesn't really make any sense. They're the first ones that will be like, yes, they're, I hate the government. I don't trust them. I don't like the judicial system. I don't like big corporations. I don't like, they're all doing terrible things for profit and hurting people. But yes, I want them to control free speech. It's totally weird, but I don't find that those two perspectives find very much common ground. And so I don't even know. I want to ask you about Section 230 in a second. However,
if I could comment quickly on that point, it's there's the real takeaway here is that there is an inherent implication there that we, left to our own devices, are too much of an issue for any, that the government is telling us that we are not allowed to think and say what we want because that creates danger. Like, that's the inherent implication. They'll point to the extreme cases and be like, that's why. But realize they're talking about everybody. They're saying that you as an American are just not smart enough, not capable enough to be able to have the freedom to express what you want. It has to be cultivated by your betters, right? That's what this ultimately comes down to. And the government is that entity. They feel that they are the ones that need to oversee the peons that don't know how to rationalize the information. And that's so incredibly insulting. And the real point is that danger that they're insinuating or they're implying is never removed. Danger is never removed from your life. Government simply, in my opinion, adds another layer of that danger to your life. The danger is always there. So to imply that adding this restriction will remove that danger is simply a fallacy.
No, I agree with that last point. And I wanted to push back. If someone says to you, yeah, but a lot of Americans don't know about the stuff you know about. They're not teed up with the time and the resources for whatever reason. Maybe they're just working too hard or they don't, they just don't have the research or whatever. Because I hear that all the time, but the average person doesn't know. They don't know. And I agree with you. It's insulting to tell people that they don't have the ability to do what, say, a Nancy Pelosi can do or something. But at the same time, if somebody says that to you, what's your response to them?
What would say what exactly?
Saying, but the average American, because what you were saying originally is, it's insulting to people that they're saying you don't have the ability to think for yourself. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the critics would say, well, yeah, a lot of people aren't thinking for themselves. That's why we have some of the problems that we have. So we got to do it for them.
So that's exactly the point, though. So what to that argument that you're saying that they're making is that we shouldn't allow people like me to inform these people because they don't know this information. I mean, that's counterintuitive, right? The idea is that they don't know this information because they have stopped people like me from being able to inform them because they won't get this information from any other source other than independent. And I mean, that's very apparent, right? I mean, to the larger discussion about censorship, I started, somebody else has allowed me to use their stream key to be able to pump my shows out on YouTube still, just to kind of give them a little middle finger, nice. And what's funny is they instantly deleted the first one that I did. And guess what it was discussing? It was discussing verified information about AstraZeneca and blood clots that Norway and Germany have said, that Norway specifically, that we've proven that the blood clots were caused by the vaccine. And all I said was these experts in Norway have said that they proved that. And this is censored instantly. And just goes to show you, if you can't find that information on anywhere and they're going to remove it everywhere else, what they're really doing is controlling what those people are thinking, not helping them see the full picture. That's what we're trying to do, is give them the other information and be like, look, right now we're being censored for saying that it's even not a fact, but possible that that's causing this. And here are entire experts over here, entire regulatory agencies saying that this is possible, and we're being censored for suggesting or even saying that they're saying that. How can it be wrong to report that experts are saying something? That's exactly what the mainstream media does every single day.
It's a chicken and the egg argument, because is the information not there because it doesn't exist, because no scientist has said it, or just because, we're not allowed to see it? And so you have a lot of people, even in mainstream news, who maybe would be someone who, if that was put in front of them, would take it seriously, the stuff that you're talking about, but they just never see it. They're not doing the extra work to seek it out. And so then they go to these editorial meetings and they're like, that doesn't exist. If you say that, that's crazy. And you're like, well, no, actually it's there. But because it's more and more hidden from the public eye, a lot of people just think, oh, well, that doesn't exist. Like, there are no issues with that because I haven't seen it. If I haven't seen it, then it doesn't exist. And you're like, well, no, actually, there's probably a lot of information out there you haven't seen because it hasn't been allowed to get to your screen, or it hasn't been allowed to get. And just that level of the level of, I guess, and hey, as somebody who lived for many years in that world without asking these kinds of questions, what was it exactly for me? Was it just I was too busy? Was it that I was too comfortable? I don't know. And I guess covering the environment was where the light switch probably went off, because I started to see stuff that just wasn't making a whole lot of sense. That the people that I had trusted, I used to think that, like, you do an investigation, the government would come in and fix it. So like, hey, look at this polluter, and then you do the investigation, and then the regulation comes in, and then all of a sudden everything's better. And then I started to see how actually, like, the authority figures in the government and the people that were running corporations, where was the line? They were all going and working for each other. It didn't make a whole lot of sense. And I think that and then starting to understand the food system and all, that's where I started to say, okay, maybe it's, and then now I'm on the precipice of war and all the, I'm like, what is happening here? I spent all these years in mainstream news, and I didn't even know about the book Manufacturing Consent until I got out and I got onto YouTube. Right.
That's exactly circulating in my head while you're saying that. That's exactly the point, is that people in those circles in the mainstream, it's, we try to, it's easy to look at it as some grand conspiracy. That's always kind of the easy way to look at it, but it's not always as simple as that. There's clearly that element, but there's a lot of people in any situation, scientists, police, that actually buy into what they're doing. And it's like, to the point that I think we maybe mentioned this last time, that like Noam Chomsky made this clear in multiple interviews, that, these people in a large way wouldn't even be in those positions if they didn't already hold certs. So they're there because of that. And so they go forward thinking that they have the full picture. They trust the sources and the authorities they're already looking at, but here we are looking at the information, it's right there. So on that same note, though, I do believe a lot of them are aware of it and choose to not look at it, because they have people like us that are pushing it into their faces, people that follow them, that tag them on Twitter and say, look at this, how are you ignoring that? So there's a lot of them that choose to, because they know it's job security. But I agree. I think there's a huge portion of them that just simply think they're doing the right thing. That's an easy way to control people.
Yeah, I think in the instances you're talking about, I noticed a lot of replies with some arrogance. We're on the inside, you're on the outside. We don't have to listen to you.
Which is the wrong way to do that. Yeah.
Exactly. It's too bad that a journalist who you would hope their currency is awareness, skepticism, curiosity, and relationship. I used to say that, like, separate from my contacts and sources, I was worth very little. That was what you were paying me for, were the people that I was in contact with and the information that they were giving, and my depth of knowledge about what they were talking about, whether I understood the nuances of these topics. And so to see journalists who are offered a relationship with somebody who's different from them, basically say somebody on Twitter, hey, maybe they're kind of being a jerk when they tweet you by the way that they're saying it, but still understand where they're coming from. And then they're offering you information and insight. Like, these are all the things that I held to be high currency in my former position. And I find it to be weird that somebody comes at, offers you that, albeit sometimes in a caustic way. And instead of, hey, writing them DM, hey, tell me what you know. Tell me what you know. It's just like this flippant response, whatever. I don't have to listen to you, troll. Go away. This question, I think, is interesting. I hear this, and I've worked with a lot of scientists on my last beat, and so I actually, when I started going down this new road, a lot of them were like, oh God, Allison, we talked about this last time, Allison's QAnon now, because she's questioning this stuff. And these are scientists that are saying, hey, we need the government to come in. So this comment is, it's all social, in my opinion. People make intellectual decisions from a base of social thinking. Scientific people are different because they can detach just by opinion. And I disagree. I think that, I don't know, maybe I don't understand the comment totally, but I see people in the science world. People are people in science, people in math, people in tech, people in analytics, people in polling, whatever. People are people, and there's bias in, law, courts, right? I used to think that judges interpreted the law objectively. And now, this last several years has taught me that courts are not objective. It's just a mess, and it just gets to be more and more of a mess. It's almost like I just want to forget that I ever learned all this stuff and just go live in my middle of nowhere homestead and just tune out. But I have parents as doctors who are both scientifically minded people, and until they started to wake up, they were part of this sort of American Medical Association way of treating people, and didn't know about how they were harming folks with pharmaceuticals, and the way that they were treating with sick care, as my dad calls it, instead of health care.
Right.
And so it's, that's a scientist. My dad, he was a biology major, and he was a doctor. He was supposed to look at people like objectively, right? But they were tainted with the same kind of propaganda and problems. So I'm curious what you think about that. Is there such a thing as people who are scientifically minded, I guess, in the sense that I work in science, I guess, and so I'm free, so you should trust me, like Fauci, for instance.
Well, I mean, look, is it like the first point is I agree with you. I disagree with the premise that it's one or the other. Like you're right. People are people, whether you're a scientist, a cop, or doctor, your personal experience and what you believe will influence your choices, whether you realize it or not. But I also agree with the whole point there, like we said in the beginning, I find it impossible that there's not some element within all of these things of people that just actually believe they're doing the right thing. I really believe that. I mean, because they're trained to do so. I mean, that's the whole point of all the social engineering. It's like, look at the military where they break people down and basically reprogram them. It's kind of the same thing in all these places. I mean, I think, was it you and I that spoke about this? In the medical it's militaristic, and that people will not they're terrified to even challenge what they're being discussed because they'll quickly be pushed to the back of the class.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so there's a culture of do not push back against authority, and that gets pushed right out into the world where you don't question what the CDC says, and that's inherently ignorant. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but I do agree with you that the overall point is that people will be people, and they will choose to go, well, this person is funding my entire operation, and I know that they don't like this finding, so I'll pepper this with the right kind of
Mm-hmm.
words so it's not as definitive. And that we find that constantly, and they'll admit to that. I mean, look, if you're a scientist and you literally can't have a career as a scientist unless you lean into certain things, what else is your choice? I'm not saying I agree with it, but I understand why it's happening, and that is across the board.
It's a brain numbing, like you said, that I think comes from the same reason in high school or middle school that we gang up on each other and bully each other. I feel like it comes out of the same base part of our brain where we're just getting clicks and like look down at the person who doesn't dress like us or doesn't think like us.
Conformity.
Yeah, exactly. That's a heavy. I just haven't studied it enough, but it's definitely a heavy influence for a human brain. And
Well, I
yeah,
recommend.
go ahead.
No, there's an article I wrote a while back, and I'll send it to you when we're done. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes or something. But it's a classic topic that should be taught in school. I mean, this is a huge shift in the direction by powerful people, and this is in regard to the Flexner Report and the American Medical Association. And I think we even mentioned this last time. I mean, just to recognize that powerful entities, the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, can literally redirect the entire medical industry because of their interests. How do we not recognize and that's happening today? I mean, we're watching that happen today, And so we have to recognize that maybe there's an element of they think this is the right thing to do, but it's clearly more than that. And especially seeing someone like Rockefeller can do that and shift the entire direction to petroleum-based pharmaceuticals, which have shown to be very damaging, and used a homeopath for the rest of his life for him and his family. So he thought it was better, even though they banned those everywhere else. There's obvious issues there, and then we need to apply that to much larger than the medical and scientific industry. But obviously, that's very relevant to what's happening right now. But it's the full picture, And I love that you're telling your family can be in this. People are waking up left and right now. I just, on a side note, want people to recognize that I believe the majority is aware of something going on right now. The majority, I really believe that.
On some level, I think I noticed that it's a level of okay. I do. Most people are like, yeah, there probably is more than meets the eye, but still some people I think that are like, yeah, but I still don't want to know, and I get it because I think I was probably in that world maybe 10 years ago, and now I'm like, no, you know what, come hell or high water, and whatever it happens to me or my career, I want to know, because life's short, and like, what's the point if if you just want to live dulled and unaware of this? Feels like I'm sure a lot of people generations past have felt like they lived in the craziest time. Of course, I feel like I live in a crazy time. To talking about your points on the pharmaceutical stuff, you know, my dad, when I was actually thinking about having him come talk about what it's like being in mainstream medicine, and starting to go down this road of awareness and waking up, and then what it's like getting the pushback from other doctors and from hospitals and whatnot. And it's funny, he started to do a brown bag lunch for veterans because he works at the VA now. And, so he told me the story about, he gets up for his first brown bag lunch and he says, okay, to tell you about health, I got to tell you about food. But to tell you about the food system, I have to tell you about oil. To tell you about oil, I have to tell you about war. And they're like, get him off the stage. Right. They're like, get this doctor off the stage. This
too much truth.
Yeah, exactly. Like, this is the Veterans Hospital. You're not supposed to talk about oil and war. So, but I don't want to be like Chris Cuomo. Yeah.
Hell no.
I don't want to be like Chris Cuomo, so that's why I haven't had him on yet talking about that specifically, but maybe I will. I won't throw him any softball questions, I promise. So, okay, so Wooz says, people are people, no angels among us, true. And then thank you, GDNP, also, both of you guys, for the super chats. Here we go. Tom Bombadil, if I'm saying it right. Scientific integrity is what is important. Some people who call themselves scientists have none. But to go back to your point, to assume that somebody doesn't have integrity, I guess it's like you're assuming that they know what they're talking about is a lie, right? That's what a lot of people say, you're lying, or when you're assuming intention, I guess, whether it's mainstream media, it's science, it's whatever else, you're assuming that they have a level of awareness that they may not have. To me, this is a more dangerous problem, I think, actually, than the outright lie. I really do, because that's harder for me to deal with. Like, if somebody knows they're lying, all you have to do is present the facts and you win the debate. If the person has this moral superiority about them to which they will not even debate with you, they don't want to be, because I've heard people like, I can't remember the guy's name. He wears a bow tie and he's a vaccine scientist. He was on Joe Rogan's podcast not too long ago. Oh. And I remember Joe saying something about, like, what about debate Bobby Kennedy or have a debate? And he's like, I'm not going to acknowledge that point, because that acknowledges that there's even value to what they're saying. And that to me is the next level of problem. So I actually, even though people think it's more sinister for it to be this, I know what I'm doing, I'm purposely lying, I actually think it's more problematic to have people who are not even aware, because how do you even work with them? And I guess that's the question I throw to you is, what do you do in those situations? If you do come up, I'm sure you have people that come after you all the time. How do you respond to them? Or do you just say, I'm not going to waste my time because you're not having a good faith dialogue with me?
Well, first of all, even though I occasionally do it too, I broadly argue that engaging on Twitter is utterly useless. Yeah. I've had maybe 2 or 3 times where I've actually had a conversation where they go, wow, thank you for telling me. It's always so full of vitriol and negativity.
Agree, yeah. And especially the format itself matters, because what's the point going back and forth like that? But say it's somebody who, like, in person or calls you or said, I had a guy actually, and hey, if you're watching, I'm going to get back to you, I promise. We went back and forth. I was going to be out of town. But watch the stream that I did with Kennedy's, the president of Children's Health Defense, right? Am I saying that? I think that's the name of their group. Yeah. And was like, I just don't understand why people don't trust the science. That's what he said. I don't understand why people don't trust the science. I really want to understand. And can I email you? Sure. Send me an email. And so, say you have somebody like that who genuinely now granted, they still think you're an idiot because you're even having these conversations, but they want to know, they want to know what is going on. Do you engage, and how do you talk about it?
Absolutely. That is the most important aspect. This is what I'm constantly telling people, or even look, for instance, the mods that I used to have on our YouTube channels. I explicitly tell them, like, look, the whole point is, if there's anybody coming on, and I don't care if they're very adamant and they're constantly engaging and disagreeing with everything. That's what we want. We want intelligent dialogue. I want people to come on who say, you're wrong, and here's why. Not come on and be like, you're all a bunch of morons because you can't see. That's not conducive to they're not there to have a conversation, right? That's just your point, right? So if people are reaching out to you in this way, yes, that's the best thing. I hope for that, because one, maybe I'll learn something new. Maybe they'll show me something and I go, what do you know? That, I'm always open to evolving my opinion based on new information, which is actually what science is. But or the point also could be that maybe I will inform him about something that he didn't know, him or her. And that's a very important part of this. That's what the whole purpose of what we're doing, in my opinion, is to reach someone just like that. You know, I used to say that. I mean, still say it. If we can change one person's mind, we can reach one person a day, then we were a success today. You know, that's all it's really
Yeah,
about.
I agree. I think when I first started out my career, that's probably part of the reason why I went into mainstream news, because I thought the bigger the audience, the more impact. And I actually think now it's the 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 right, I don't want to say the right people, because I hate using the word right and wrong, but the 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 students that want the info, like even if it's only 5 of them, but all 5 are in, they're in and ready and hungry. Like, I'd rather take those 5 over 100 people just throwing popcorn in their mouth, not really paying attention, goes in one ear out the other. And then
Right.
it's, for me nowadays, it's quality, not quantity, of the conversation and who you're talking to. And history has always sort of been affected by maybe a minority of people who have ideas that have challenged the majority of how people are thinking.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. You know,
no, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. Go ahead. I believe it was Margaret Mead. I could be mixing up the quote, but that one of the favorite quotes is that, never underestimate. I'll say it's a paraphrasing, but never underestimate what a small group of dedicated people can do in regard to, or something like
Hmm.
that, in regard to changing the world, because that's always what has been the essence of changing the world, is a small group of people that care enough to do everything they can to change it. Rarely is it this massive, grouping thing. It's about people that really care, and it's a powerful thing to realize. It's just, the point is, even your single actions out there can change the world. The whole point, back to the debate of RFK Jr., I wanted to point out on that, is it's so insulting to us, because I would argue that guy possibly knows that RFK Jr. is making legitimate points and is therefore afraid to debate him for that exact reason. Why somebody who would dismiss even discussing the
Hmm.
possibility of a debate with someone like that is undermining the very foundation of their entire stance. I mean, if you're afraid to argue with somebody against countering points, then you don't believe in your own points. I mean, it's simple as that. There's not an argument that's beneath that. I guess I don't know. The point is, someone like him, at the very least, is standing on scientific documentation. What he's saying is rooted in facts. You can disagree with it, but you can't pretend like it's just so absurdly ridiculous I won't even give it a response. That is ignorant.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that when it comes to when it's not just that. I mean, that was one example, but I heard that a lot from editors who are making decisions about. I don't want to say it was like an everyday thing, but it was certainly on certain topics. That's how managing editors would talk in corporate newsrooms, saying basically, we're not going to let this person on our air because, and they really believed that they were taking the moral high ground by silencing people for that exact reason, that you're going to give credence to points of view that are leading people astray, and that we shouldn't be doing that. And that's a whole nother topic, because what happens in mainstream news, or what happens on the internet, with independent journalists and stuff. I think people like you, or others who could host conversations like that, where you know a lot about the topic, and you can help sift through some of the information that people may not have. Like, that's a great place for a person like that and a Bobby Kennedy to get together. And so I get it that maybe it's not the format in a 1-minute package on NBC or something, but to turn it down altogether, even on a platform like yours where you could go 2 hours, I don't get that. I can get why someone would say, I don't want to engage in a 1-minute long debate where it's like 2 sound bites back and forth, and a 90-second package on NBC. But to turn it down
I still don't.
altogether on something like yours, I don't get.
Yeah, well, I still don't even. I get your point, but I still don't even see why, if you believe in your standpoint, to argue that, well, that's not enough time to clearly show that my point's right. It just suggests that you don't believe enough in what you're saying. And I mean, at the end of the day, what we are they're taking conscious. It really, I was going to say it suggests, but it doesn't really suggest. It shows quite clearly that the people we're discussing right there have already made up their mind about what the truth
Well,
is.
that's true.
That's not what journalism is, right? That's not there. You can well, I guess in a certain sense, yes, you're deciding what that
Mm-hmm.
truth is in that moment. But when there's new information that comes to the conversation, was my point, right? So they're bringing
Sure.
new information in, and to say, well, no, we're not even going to allow that in. That means that you're ignoring information that could evolve the conversation because you've already decided what the truth
Mm-hmm.
is. But that's not the actual job. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And that shows you that they are setting their perspectives, their opinions, as the tone of the
Mm-hmm.
facts, and that's incorrect. I mean, that's any real journalist can show would argue that that is the opposite of what they should be doing.
Yeah, and I guess what I meant was like the person that's being interviewed, like you, for instance, somebody calls you up and says, Ryan, I want to get you on NBC to talk about speech suppression online. You're going to get one soundbite. Would you take it or not? So that's the question I have. It's I can understand why someone says, I don't want to engage in a debate where I'm going to get one soundbite and you're going to choose it out of, 2 hours of content and it's not going to make my point. It's going to, I guess I can understand why people don't want to be a part of that kind of journalism.
Totally. No, I did misunderstand. I totally agree with that. Well, here's the problem is and this is what I hear from a lot of people that will ask or be asked to go on and they say like I mentioned Vanessa Beeley, this happened to her more than once. And she says, well, I will, if you agree to these things. One, that I get a copy of the full interview. Two, that, on and on and on, to make sure that that's the way it goes, because you're right. What'll happen is they'll cherry pick one of the things you say. They'll take it out of context. And this happens all the time. I mean, I've done it on a show where I'll show you the full discussion. It happens to Iran every day, where their foreign minister will make a comment about something in regard to their nuclear program, their civilian nuclear program, and make it very clear. And it's a very measured and clear response that's not, and they'll take one part at the end and make it seem like he threatened the United States. And it's like, wait, did you hear the full thing he said? It wasn't even close to a threat, but it's not the point. It's about getting what they want, extracting what they can use as a soundbite. So for that very point, I would be very skeptical. I don't think I would go on a lot of these shows for that exact reason. But same time, it's kind of a risk about hoping you can get something out. So again, last point, it speaks to the fact of whether they're going to be transparent about what you said or cultivate it to what they already think is the truth. The same point.
Or even have the ability to understand it. I just had my husband on my live stream last night talking about when he was interviewed about human behavior, which is what he does for a living, and threat analysis and whatnot. And he teaches a very lengthy class, and so his idea was when he talks to the reporter, I'm going to give him an hour primer, then the interview is going to go an hour, and I'm going to give him all this information, and then they'll really understand what they're talking about. But the reality was this reporter had like 1 hour to understand what he was talking about once all the tape was in, and he was logging it and stuff, and it was too much information, and so he ends up just thinking, okay, what does this mean? See something, say something. That's what this is. This is see something, say something, which is my husband's least favorite phrase of all time. He hates see something, say something. And so when they went on TV and they're like, boil this down for us in one sentence, Greg. What is this? He goes, see something, say something. And my husband's at home like, no, so even the best meaning reporter, especially in television news, is sitting there just like, I can't even, so I don't even know if it's the right place for it anyway. Like, so this is just to say that I criticize my industry, but I don't even know if they're the right place for these conversations. That said, there isn't an excuse anymore because there are people like you. There's the internet, there's you. If YouTube would allow us to have these conversations, we can have them online. Exactly. And so there's no excuse anymore to just say that I'm going to be, chopped up and filleted and nobody's going to understand what I'm talking about and it's too quick and it's this and that. There's plenty of opportunity for people to have these debates if they want to have them. And I agree with you. I think that a lot of people just don't, and maybe they are scared. I wanted to ask this question. This person's asked this 3 times and maybe you'll understand it better than me. Hi, Allison. May I ask not only you and Ryan, but relatively everyone watching also why everyone everywhere is still only focused on their own so-called governments and, gosh, I don't know where the end was at, but let's just say it ends at government. Does that make sense with you? Why we're only focused on our government?
Right. Assuming that was all it was, if maybe the rest of it changes.
I'm going to try to find it if I can.
I get the point is that, and I would say I'm at least one that I would argue is not doing that. Like I go out of my way to highlight the crimes being committed by multiple governments, not just my government. Or I hate the phrasing of that, right? It's not my government. These are
countries. Countries. That was the other word. Countries. Governments and countries.
Right. Exactly. So that is the point then. So I agree because see what happens is, well, first of all,
I'm going to go grab my daughter while you're talking because she's freaking out.
Please,
Keep going, Ryan. Keep going.
From a standpoint as an independent, I would argue, as an American in the United States, I have the most ability. I have the ability to have the most change, affect the most change on the government of the United States because I'm here. So I do tend to focus on that more than everything else, as well as the point that I think it's hard to miss that the U.S. government is very clearly involved in most of the terrible things happening in the world. That's not an opinion. That's just very clear to point out. But to that point, from my perspective, I do go out of my way to talk about the Saudi government or the Israeli government or the UK government and so on. But the point is, I agree. Seemingly most people out there are only hyper-focused on not even, and this is the crazy part, not even just the U.S. government. They're hyper-focused on the left or the right or even one person in the left or the right. And this is how ridiculous it gets. that you boil this down to such, I mean, when you affect the left or the right of the government, you don't affect the government. You affect one part of it, and then it all continues on, which is the ultimate point. So all I was saying is just that I agree, is that most people out there are hyper focused on their own, one part of it. And then I made the point that it's even in the US, it's even more ridiculous that they end up focusing on just the left or the right, as opposed to the whole government, right? Instead of the world and the greater reset, or the great reset, and everything that's happening, so it's a
I
good
need to
point.
have you on for just to talk about the Great Reset, because that is an area of research. Yeah, do you see Ryan? I have Lily here. Yeah, say hey. Thank you for being a professional and being able to take over the show for me. Okay. So thanks Seth for the super chat. Michael, I don't have a question for Ryan. This is for the producer, which is my 10-month-old. Thank you. That will go to her college fund. And which she could just go subscribe to The Last American Vagabond, and that could just be college. You probably get a lot more out of it. Bob Wildfish, the truth is more difficult to know than a lot of people appreciate. It is difficult, and I guess, maybe we could sort of wrap it up kind of on that note, which is, it's not, in today's world, it is both easier and harder to know what's going on, because, right? Because you can access the information if you're willing to go and do the work. You can, in a way that we probably never could have even 15, 20 years ago, much less 100 or 200 years ago. But you get thrown a lot of propaganda too. And you're constantly inundated with that. So I guess I like to talk about this from a, and maybe this is from my background, but I look at these as individual problems, as an individual person problem that then becomes it becomes a family, that becomes a neighborhood, that becomes a community, that becomes a city, that becomes a government, a county, a state, a government. But if you were to really parse it out, if you had healthy, brave, courageous people thinking through this stuff, willing to have these conversations, we would get somewhere, and that you would throw great information at a very scared or just kind of numb, going through the motions, kind of, somebody that's just not interested. And it doesn't matter how compelling your information is, that person's just not going to be interested in hearing it. What do you think helped you? What was it that informed your waking up process that you feel like would help maybe other people thinking through this? And if, was there something that, as you were going through that you talked to your friends about, or you saw that was helpful to them? Was it a book? Was it, spending a few moments in silence every day? I mean, that's something that I do that I think has really helped me, is making sure in the morning and at night that I'm spending some time in quiet and detaching from everything. So I kind of check my ego every day, because I think that's where a lot of those, what about if they come for your career? What if they come for your reputation? What if they come for, you can't pay for your kid to go to college? All these very basic things that go into why a person doesn't want to ask those tough questions. So maybe curious what your advice is, because you're a very brave guy and you talk about a lot of stuff that people are very interested in, but you didn't just, I don't think that just happened overnight.
Yeah. Well, I to the first part of it, I definitely feel it's much more prolific than most people realize. This is something that is, it's not, it's not a culture. This is something that's been engineered over a really long period of time, whether it's our Prussian-based school systems or our, very centralized everything, it would seem, and, just kind of bombarding people with a very clear narrative. For me, it's about recognizing the contradiction. It comes down to a choice, sadly enough, because to your point, I've never seen it this obvious in my entire life. It's ridiculous. It's clown shoe ridiculous. I mean, it's like these people are waving. It's everything they do is showing us that, one, they don't even believe what they're saying. That, two, they're just flying by the seat of their pants and making up things now, seemingly not even science anymore, just fear and opinion about what may happen, new variants, and maybe, it's getting ridiculous. So what we need to do is make a conscious choice to not be fed into the narrative, right? Which is the hardest part to do, to break away from that mainstream cycle. I just cannot stress that enough. Doesn't mean you should ignore what they're saying, but to be tuned in, counting down 3, 2, 1, and you're every day, or they're brainwashing people. But for me, it was about cannabis. That was a really big moment for me to recognize how much power the individual, or rather the collective, has against the federal government if they choose across party lines, and so what we need is to recognize whatever that topic is and see that if we stay stuck in the two-party system, we will never effectively change something, even if you believe in the person on that side. Just that's what I try to say to people who believed in Obama, who believed in Trump, right? You can believe that both those people were the best people that were going to change the world. What happened? well, the other side wouldn't let him do it. Okay, I don't agree with that. But if that's what you believe, doesn't that still show you that the system is broken to a degree that will never allow change? They only allow you to believe in something that leads you further into the agenda they're trying to progress. So the point is, we need to make a conscious choice within ourselves to be open to information, to be open to all things that seem to be involved in the discussion. Like, they're setting narratives now that are reflexively dismissed. If there's any negative about vaccines, that's fake news. Just immediately disregard it. While we have entire countries proving these things are the facts, you know? Anyway, the reality is we just need to make it's self-responsibility, right? That's one of the most important tenets of freedom, self-responsibility, right? We need to be able to take it upon ourselves to look into this stuff.
GDNPB, we can't change DC or our state or Silicon Valley without taking our neighbors first. I don't know if taking or talking. And this is why they do not want people like Ryan on YouTube that are showing their agenda. 2130 grift. Agenda.
One of the reasons I think why they're continuing to try, I mean, even Germany just tried to again lock down before Easter, even though they got pushed back, which shows you again that people are not buying this. You know, she had to push back and go, wait, I made a mistake. What happens around the dinner table? What happens at Christmas? Right? You talk about what's going on, and we're all going to go, is everybody, this is crazy. Like, this is, we shouldn't be allowing that. That's what they desperately don't want. And she mentioned the 2030. That's, you know, this is, maybe we can talk about this in another show, because that's a big topic that I believe stems all the way back to 9/11.
Totally, yeah. Anytime you want to come back, happy to have you. It's an honor to talk to you. I think to your point about not having those conversations, it almost is like social media has created the perfect tinder for this fire, because we now just unfriend, and we don't just do it online, but we do it in real life. I know families who don't talk to that uncle or mom or dad or brother or sister because you could see, you know, oh, I know what they post on social media and I don't want to talk to them. And the more skeptical and dehumanized, I guess, the people that like even your closest loved ones can become, the more you just become insulated in the tribal ideology that you're talking about, where you're not questioning because that you're fed this you're not fed the facts, you're fed the attacks on character, which is what happens with people like yourself.
Ad hominems.
Yeah. And so that's how you stifle the conversation. You're like, well, they must be a terrible person because they think this or they think that. And if you're a terrible person, then obviously I don't need to listen to you. You're terrible for all these reasons. You're a fascist or you're whatever else, and never debate the facts, but you just go after that. So no, yeah, it's difficult. I guess last question, because I feel like we didn't even talk about your censorship that much, and that's kind of the point of the video. Where do you go from here? Like, what's the next step? Just so everybody knows, the link to your website's in the description. That's probably the best way for people to get a hold of you. But you are on a bunch of different social media sites. But I'm just curious, are you going to try to do YouTube again? What's your plan moving forward?
Yeah, and thank you for asking. I mean, and just to point out in the beginning too, as much as this is important to talk about, I want to be clear that, the story is not me or me being censored. The story is that YouTube is continuing to censor people that are speaking truth, and that's what's crazy. That's the point of what we're talking about today. I mean, the YouTube question first is one that's difficult, because I still agree with the logic that I've been saying this whole time, that if the point of doing what we're doing is to reach people who are lost to this, that is a gold mine to people who are lost, right? That is what they've turned YouTube into. It is they're pushing out anybody who's challenging narratives, and they're pumping in mainstream narrative, despite the fact that just years ago, mainstream was only belittling and making fun of YouTube like crazy. Now they're taking over it because they recognize that their whole archaic news system is dying, and they know that. So they're pushing in. But my point was, I think it's important to continue to push your content on those platforms, because not to help the platform, but to make sure people there can see what we're talking about. But at the same time, I argue that people that are on that platform that don't create content should be anywhere else but YouTube, right? So people think that's contradictory. I really don't. I think it makes the moment that that's not completely being overtaken with this, then I will stop using it, But now that they've deleted both channels, I'm questioning whether I will. I don't know. I'm thinking maybe I'll use people's stream keys like I was talking about for important shows. But the larger point is, I'm going to continue to post all this stuff on all the alternative platforms: BitChute, Odyssey, Rockfin. Rockfin's one I'm streaming on right now. And there will be a new platform that I'm working on that I'm involved with, which I hope will be revolutionary. I really mean that. And that should be coming out probably at the end of this month or the middle of April. And so that point is that there are new things coming, and the whole point is to do this, to continue to branch out. Everyone out there, make your own platforms, make your own websites, continue to push this truth out there. But go to the website, thelastAmericanVagabond.com. That's where you can find, it's the hub for everything else.
And that made me think of another question real fast.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So Mickey the Fourth says, much love from Czechia, Allison. Keep up the great work and much luck to your guest. And then Scott says, what danger did this man pose? Anyone? So I would like you to talk to, what do you think the danger is that you posed, if you posed any? But last question also, after you answer that, what about the devices themselves? Because if you're coming out with a platform that, we can all jump onto, or some, it's going to be a competitor to YouTube and not the same kind of censorships are. What about how we saw Parler was taken from Amazon and Apple wasn't going to carry it anymore? What do we do now with the fact that our devices themselves are owned by these companies that are also in on this?
Yeah, good question. Well, first, to what danger I pose. Now, there's two ways to answer that. One, I could honestly answer what I genuinely think they think the danger is that I pose, but the real discussion is surface level, like what they're saying, the argument of why I'm dangerous. And really, it's because what they're saying is that what I'm doing is either intentionally spreading fake information for my own benefit, which is clearly not the case, or I am misunderstanding what I'm presenting, which is dangerous because it's creating vaccine hesitancy. Which, by the way, I think there's a lot of reason people should be hesitant to this. I mean, if we have 60% of our healthcare workers saying no, I'm pretty sure it's not me making people hesitant, but that's another discussion. But the truth is that if you really look at what I'm doing, which is that's all I really ask people to do. If you really believe what I'm doing is fake news, watch what I'm doing. Like, I can say things and based on my opinion, but what I'm walking through scientific information. If I can reference the British Medical Journal discussing why this is alarming and why they think that people in this industry are using their clout to manipulate this from the British Medical Journal, and I can be called fake news, a good source. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
It's really ridiculous. But so as we walk through the scientific information, I will give the information that gives the other side of it, and I'll give my opinion. And to the other part of it, the real reason they're actually afraid of that, in my opinion, is because that challenges the narrative. But this speaks to the larger agenda, becomes conspiratorial. And it also we have to remember, weigh this with the idea that even within that whole conspiracy, maybe 50%, 70% of them believe they're doing the right thing, right? Like we were talking about. But at the end of the day, it is very clearly an agenda that certain things have been deemed unallowable, right? If, like, for instance, even back when YouTube said that they were going to remove conspiracy theory, and they said, we won't even allow people to challenge historical events. I mean, do you realize that 9/11, for instance, the whole discussion is right this moment in litigation? The Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry is currently introducing documentation to show that there was foreknowledge, or that the Alaska study proved that there was at least 100 simultaneous detonations, otherwise the building wouldn't have fallen the way it did. And yet we're still not allowed to argue or discuss those topics on YouTube because they say we can't. It just shows you the larger picture, that they are controlling the discussions of things that they don't agree with, period. And all I ask is that people out there continue to look into these things, whether it's COVID-19 or past major events, or the fact that the story that we should all know by now, and some people continue to talk about it, is that the OPCW was involved with creating a false flag in Syria. That was proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. Bolivia was a regime change carried out by the U.S. government, and MIT proved it. These are facts that we just don't like to talk about. And these would be all conspiracy theory from the mainstream media.
The thing that you bring up about telling people to watch what you're doing and then go check it for themselves, I really like that, and I took notice of that right away when I saw your website, because I don't see that hardly ever. I never see it on my old industry's shows or on their websites. But don't take our word for it. Go check it out if you want to double check. We're fine with that. We're not, our egos aren't bruised. You never see that, but you do, and I think that that shows your level of integrity with what you're trying to do. Again, we started off the stream by saying, and you said this in the last one, what's wrong with making a mistake? Like, everybody makes mistakes. You're a human. If my dad said to me once, he was talking to his buddy who was a therapist, a psychotherapist. You know, they were taking a walk one day, and my dad, you know, was talking about, because doctors, a lot of them, they really, besides the fact they probably go into fields because they kind of have these, like, you know, God complex, they're going to save people, or they're really hard on themselves when they don't, like, a lot of times, right? If something happens. And the truth is, like, everybody makes mistakes. The problem is what happens when you make a mistake that has severe consequences to it. And you know, it's the terrible reality of, you know, the human quest for knowledge, the human quest to contribute something to the world. And if we're not willing to take courageous steps, like you said, you know, then we're all just too afraid of, well, what if I say something wrong, or what if it ends up not being true, or what, you know, but we have, at some point, I think, like I said the last time we were discussing this, if it's safer to just repeat lies because no one's going to care because everyone's saying them, right? Which it kind of is in a lot of ways. It's easier to just continue pushing ideas and theories and talking points that may not be true at all, but everyone's saying them, versus the guy like you who's going out there. You may make a mistake every once in a while, but you're at least taking a stab in the dark trying to figure out what's really going on. And then you're telling people, you know what, don't take my word for it. Go look it up. We're using all these documents. Bobby Kennedy's site, they do the same thing. Here are the government documents. Here's where the research coming from. Take a look at it. To me, that takes a lot of bravery, but it also takes a lot of integrity to do something like that, because I noticed that immediately, and I really do appreciate that you tell people that. It's like, you know what, you don't have to trust me. You know, I'm not just like spouting off random stuff. Like, here's the stuff. You show people, you're transparent, and there's just, I wish there was more of that, but I do recommend people go to your site, check it out. Ryan, is there anything else that you want to say that, you know, we haven't talked about? And I'm sure, you know, of course, I'm going to try to get you on soon to talk about all these other things that I have. Again, it's pretty sad, but the reality is when you live in the mainstream corporate world, these are just not things that people are bringing up on a regular basis. And the groupthink is strong. So I do appreciate having voices like yours to challenge and help unlearning process.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I just leave it at the idea that what you just mentioned right there is the other side of that is that it creates an environment where you will guarantee that you'll miss a story, or that you won't cover something that is true, at least at some point. If you're asking yourself, what if this is going to be fake news? What if they're going to challenge this? And so that's the climate they want to create, where honest people are afraid to even dive into a topic because it's already been kind of shadowed with this discussion of fake news and misinformation. And that is going to guarantee that real things will be missed. Guaranteed. It creates the climate of err on the side of ignoring real things. I mean, and that's just crazy that we can see that so readily, because they have decided that allowing us to have the freedom to think what we want creates a world that is too dangerous. And that, again, is the insinuation that the collective is more important than the individual, which is what's happened with COVID-19. And by the way, that directly contrasts international law. Just so we all know that both the idea that we need to have vaccinations or anything else because the collective is more important, or any other discussion we're having. The international law roundly states that your individual body and your autonomy and your own choices are more important than the collective of science or the society. Been stated more than once.
Okay, last question. This came in, Mickey the Fourth, super chat. Considering the guest taste in questioning the narrative, I recommend book Red Symphony. Only 50 pages, either the biggest lie or the most important document of the last century. Authenticity dubious. Have you heard of this book?
No, I haven't. I'll have to look that up.
Okay. Well, Ryan, thanks again. Everybody, Ryan Christian of The Last American Vagabond, no longer on YouTube, but maybe you will find him stealing someone's streaking. No, stealing's not the right word. What's the repurposing? Repurposing.
Using it. They sent him to me. It's not,
he didn't steal him. Yeah, he's not hacking into your YouTube. But I would be honored if you'd hack into my YouTube channel. We'll see. We'll see what see what happens to me for. Have you noticed that people that if you're going on their channels and talking about it, are they facing any pressure? Because my last stream with you it's still monetized. So I'm curious how you come on my channel and say the same things and be monetized, but if you say it on your channel, you get taken off.
Well, here's what's interesting, right? Here's what I find the most telling. One, there's a level. I never self-censor, but there's a level of me carefully choosing what I'm saying to avoid influence, hurting your channel. But at the same time, here's the real point, and it's the same thing that Patreon admitted in an email. The only time it becomes right is when you back it up with source material, right? So on your show, I'm saying these things, we're discussing them, and we're pointing elsewhere. But on my show, I'm going, here's what I'm saying, and here's the document. Here's where it says what I'm saying, and we can't allow that because that proves what he's saying, right? I mean, this is crazy.
Right.
This is what Patreon literally said in an email. You can talk about COVID-19, you just can't spread misinformation. It's okay. So the only difference between those two things is that I'm showing you the documents, and on the side, we're just talking about them. I mean, think about how crazy
That's
that
nuts.
is.
Yeah, I can't really make sense of how they're coming up with that. Just to say that it seems like there are a lot of people with not a ton of critical thinking skills in these corporations. I really don't know if it's hard for me to
I tend to think it's more sinister than that
sinister.
myself, but
Okay.
that's just me.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. I definitely am not discounting that there could be far more sinister. Like we said at the beginning, I used to think that these government hearings were pressuring the companies, and the companies are like, oh, okay, please just leave us alone. We'll do whatever you say. And now I'm starting to wonder if that's just for us to think the government's pressuring the companies, and that they're not just working in cahoots together to suppress speech and guide us in this, continual dark tunnel.
We should ask the question if, and I can answer before I even say it, that there's a lot of evidence that shows this is clearly the case, but ask the question out there, guys. If we consider the possibility that Facebook, Twitter, these things were not just organic companies that popped up time where this was happening, but more so a military operation that was designed to do exactly what it did do, right? If you listen to the actual people involved with building something like Facebook, they tell you what it's doing. It is rewiring your brain. One of the creators of Facebook has stated more than once that he will never allow his children to use Facebook. I mean, it's really crazy. I mean, these are some interviews that I asked people to look up because it's unnerving. All of the people that were behind Facebook have now spoken out about how alarmingly dangerous it is and how it's broken our society. And it's not just Facebook, right? So ask the question, if these were possibly created for this purpose, and maybe they're being used to do so, because that has led to exactly where we are now, or at the very least they've been harnessed. But it's a good question to ask.
Yeah. Well, I do appreciate it, Ryan. Again, everybody, Last American Vagabond, the link is in the description, and Ryan's going to come back and talk about whatever other big topics that you would be interested in, but you can go to his website and hear it all himself. But of course, the reason that I like having you on here, besides all of the wealth of information that you have, is, Ryan, I really do think that you, even though you never worked in corporate news, you have a pretty good handle on how a lot of this goes down. And so it's nice to talk to you about this stuff, given my background and what people are seeing on these channels on a regular basis, or on the websites and New York Times or whatever, because sometimes I think people, not that there isn't, like we've talked about, not that there isn't this sinister side to things, but I think you understand sort of the hazy, just sort of like this, how the systemic brain haze, and on the lower levels, and I really believe that if I can, what I'm trying to do on this channel is not just to inform the public about how this news is put together so that they understand the product they're buying. At the very least, like, you can still buy it if you want to still watch the Today Show. All right, Lily, hang on. She's talking about conspiracy theories down there. If you want to still watch the Today Show, watch the Today Show. But I'm just going to tell you how this stuff is put together. That way, you can make your decision for yourself. And the other thing, though, is I really hope people working in that atmosphere, which they already are starting to. I get messages all the time from people who work at CNN, former news directors and local news stations, saying, thank you for doing what you're doing. Because they're also starting to, figure out that, it's going in a direction that we need to, it no longer silence is the right path, that we need to be talking about it. And I think if we can approach these people with what you're talking about, the way that I'm trying to, without necessarily taking it to every single one of you is like this, just evil thought monger. We understand how this is happening. We understand the conundrum and the system, and but let's talk about how you can do better. Let's talk about how you can wake up. Let's talk about, so that we're like meeting with a little bit, because I don't, not to say that necessarily people always deserve this, the olive branch, the thought olive branch, but I want to affect the people who are making these decisions in these institutions, even if, like we said, it's only 5 of them. But I can get 5 of them in an editorial meeting to start saying, I don't know if that's totally true. And I do feel like you're able to understand, you know, like I said, even though you know, you came from a different perspective, you get that, hey, like you said, if there's even one person that's like, okay, I still am not really sure I agree with what you're saying, and I'm kind of nervous about what you're saying, but I'm willing to hear it. Like, that's the person in those newsrooms. I don't want to just I guess it's just to say, I don't want to totally give up on the fact that there are people in those newsrooms that are paying attention. They are following channels like mine or like yours. And so, you know, more and more, I say to people who really hate mainstream media, which I understand. I totally understand where that comes from. I try to give a little bit of perspective on the humanity of what people are dealing with in these newsrooms, just so that if those people are paying attention, like, you understand, like, you have the chance to, like, I don't think you're totally, you're a total waste of my time. I believe you can make a difference if you know, you can jump on it too. You know, in other words, like, it's not a totally lost cause. If you're there with a brain and you're willing to wake up, like, there are people like Ryan that are there to give you information that can help you think differently. And I do think that there are people that are starting to pay attention. So anyway, thanks again for being on the channel.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that it comes down to facts. You know, that's what I always say. It's the person saying it matters, and their background matters, but it's really the facts. And so it doesn't matter who's saying it. You know, I agree. I think there's plenty of people involved in here that we should be willing to entertain, you know, listen to what they're saying. I say the same thing about mainstream media. Whether it's me, you, anybody, there should be a level of skepticism. Maybe he's wrong. Maybe he's lying. But it's the data that matters, you know? So we should be open to all people's perceptions. That's what I think. So I agree completely. Thank you for having me on, Allison.
All right. Well, Ryan, we'll see you next time then. Thanks again.